Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we're here in Revelation 12, continuing our journey. What I want to do to get up to speed for where we're picking up in verse 4 is just to read the first 3 verses of the chapter. Have a video out on that. Do encourage you to go watch that. But I'll read those 3 verses and then we'll begin. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. Okay, so that's the first 3 verses. And we talked the last time. This is a description of the heavenly constellations laid out at the time of the birth of Christ. All of these things that are described, and you need to watch the last video, relate directly to constellations in the heavens as they appeared when Jesus was born. And from that, we deduce that he was born on September 11th of 3 BC by our calendar. But the big thing here beyond that, to continue on with this text, is this woman is the church, and she is giving birth to the Messiah. That is what is being depicted. And then we'll pick up with verse 4. Speaking of the great dragon, his tail swept down 1/3 of the stars from heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. So we've got this dragon up there in the sky, and there was a constellation, by the way, they aligned constellations, called Draco, was the dragon. And in this picture, he casts 1/3 of the stars down to the earth. This is talking about Satan's rebellion, his rebellion in heaven. It's talking about really a number of rebellions. We do need to get one thing clear and straight here. As we think of demons, this isn't talking about them. Demons are low-level, sniveling servants of Satan, but they are not the ones who were cast down from heaven. If you study and read the writings of the believers in antiquity, they make it very clear. And these are writings, Book of Enoch, other things, writings that the apostles make clear shaped their thinking of how these things operated, and Jesus even alludes to. Okay? Demons came about in this way. When the B'nai Elohim went into women and had sons by them, Genesis 6, 1-4, they had the offspring of that was the giants, the Nephilim, the Zimzumim, all these different names that they have emphasizing different characteristics and in different regions as they were talked about. These were hybrids. And what was going on? Satan was attempting to corrupt the bloodline. He knew that God, through the descendants of Adam and Eve, was going to bring about a savior. Well, if he corrupted the bloodlines, then that couldn't happen. It would be corrupted, and a pure, true savior couldn't come from that. Okay, he was trying to take over the DNA, and they in the day, Adam, Eve, whoever you want to talk about, Enoch, Peter, Paul, whoever, didn't know anything about DNA, but Satan did, and the fallen ones did. They knew exactly what DNA was. They were trying to corrupt it. So then you had these hybrids, the giants in the land, who were wiped out in the Exodus, in the conquering of the promised land. And then finally, the final work of wiping out the last of the giants was done by whom? David and his mighty men, Goliath and his brothers there in the Philistines, the regions in the book of Exodus and Joshua where they're told to wipe them out, kill everything, ducks, chicken, babies, women, men, kill them all. These bloodlines had been corrupted, and the broad scope of the order to destroy them all indicates something that other things in mythology would tend. In mythology, I use that term probably differently than many people in this modern world think of it. The tales and lore of old, they didn't just limit their genetic manipulation and corruption to mankind. It also went into the animal realm. That's why he had them kill them all. Leave no doubt, leave no possibility that this corruption continues. So they killed the giants. Okay. After the giants died, where did they go? Well, you're not human. You're not divine, meaning spiritual. You're some funky, weird, messed up, twisted, mutated hybrid. And so they just wandered the earth. They had no place to go. They go to the abyss. What did, in different places, with the legion of demons, these sniveling, snarling, destructive entities, the disembodied souls of the giants, who, when you read throughout cross-cultural literature of the day, they were really nasty. They ate people. They devoured people. They were feared. Okay. That even carries over into American Indian history and mythology. Where did the legion of demons not want to go? They didn't want to go back into the abyss, that place, Tartarus, where the evil ones are held. They wanted to go into the pigs. And so they went into the pigs. The pigs ran over the cliff, thereby Jesus demonstrating he had complete and total power over them. Want to read that? You can go to Matthew 8, 1 through 20. These entities, back to the text. And we have to go through all this because this isn't our worldview. It isn't what we were brought up with. It was not what we were taught in Sunday school. Would have made Sunday school a whole lot more interesting, frankly. When his tail swept down a third of the stars from heaven, these were the B'nai Elohim. First, the fallen ones who came down of their own accord, saw the sons of men and went into them and had offspring. And then the B'nai Elohim that God, after the Tower of Babel, put in charge of the 70 nations. When Jesus sends out the disciples into the Gentile lands, how many disciples does he send? 70 or 72. The numbers always vary, and I'm not going to get into the minutia of that. Same thing. 70. Reclaiming the nations. That symbolism wasn't lost on those who were sent. Definitely not at the time of the book of Acts. They got it. We don't. So we have to go into these explanations. These 70 who were placed over the nations of the earth, while God set aside Abraham, chose him out to make a new nation through which all the nations of the earth would be saved, through which they would be blessed. Those 70 went rogue. They liked the power. They became corrupt. And they have names you know. Baal, Zeus, Apollos, Ra, on and on and on we can go. They operated with different names in different lands. It was the same evil bunch. These are the ones cast down to earth to do Satan's bidding. Okay? They all came into allegiance under him. Whole lot of history covered in one verse. In one verse, we're going to see more history covered even more quickly in one brief little statement. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. Satan viewed Jesus coming to earth. He knew who he was. Satan viewed Jesus coming to earth as a wonderful opportunity. Now I've got him in my realm. I've got him where I can get him. I can use my minions. The first being Herod. Herod, who happened to, if you read history, Herod was known to be a little bit mad. Herod had done in some of his own sons because he didn't trust them and was paranoid. Herod was evil. Herod, when Jesus was born, and we can go look very quickly at Matthew 2:16. We'll go take a look at that. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years or older, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. That's who Herod was, okay? He was in, whether wittingly or unwittingly, it matters not. He was serving Satan, and his aim and intent was to destroy the child. Man, if he could have killed him as a baby, can you imagine how helpless, how weak, how vulnerable, all of those things. At the same time, how helpless, weak, and vulnerable Jesus became to be our Savior. An amazing, amazing concept. But she gave one verse here, verse 5. She gave birth to the male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne. That's it. That is the whole of the Gospels all together in one verse. Why does it get such short shrift? Or is it getting short shrift? Is it? No, it's not. The purpose of this text, of this revelation, isn't to teach us about the life and ministry and death of Jesus. It's not. It's to teach us about what Satan was doing, what he was trying to accomplish and to do. Okay? But it does tell us, give us some interesting visuals of who this male child was. He was one to rule the earth. Interestingly, it doesn't say rule. It says shepherd. Shepherd. He was one to shepherd the nations. Who is he? He's the good shepherd. And I'm not picking on the ESV. Everybody else translates it the same way. But it says shepherd, to shepherd the nation. He's the good shepherd. He's the good shepherd who laid down his life for the sheep. He's the good shepherd who goes and seeks and saves the one that is lost and leaves the 99 in the sheepfold. So much that gives us as a picture. And what did shepherds have? I learned this very early on because my father made one. My father's a pastor, doctor of theology. And when I was a kid, there was a creek near our house, and there was this oak tree by the creek. And the oak tree was like 1.5 inches in circumference, but it had fallen over when the bank it was on was undercut in heavy rain. It had fallen over and died. And my dad took that tree and he took the root ball of it. And by the time he had cut it down, it was about the size of a small, like junior-sized football, like maybe for junior high school kids. And it had 1.5 inch staff that was like 3.5, 4 feet long. Okay. When that was called the staff, the shepherd's rod, the shepherd's rod. Okay. And his was, the name of it in Hebrew is Shevet. Shevet was really cool. And I loved that thing as a kid. He wouldn't let me play with it because it would have been very dangerous. It was an oak club, 1.5 inch circumference handle with a huge oak football at the end. That is what the shepherds carried as their rod. The staff was the thing with the hook at the end that they could pick up the sheep. Okay. The rod is what they used to take on the bears and the wolves and the lions once they got too close for the sling and the stone. Okay. How does Jesus, the good shepherd, shepherd? With a rod of iron, not oak or even ironwood, a rod of iron. That's the picture. His ability, the strength, the power, the might that he has is like a rod, that shepherd's rod. I wish I had a picture of the thing. I'll have to find a picture, see if I can find one and use that sometime in the teaching here. But he ruled the nations, all the nations, because he came to save them all with a rod of iron. That was the aim and intent. In the end, we read one chapter back that he would take up his mighty power and rule. Funny, I got some feedback in the comments on that. Probably people who didn't watch the video, they just saw the title on Gab and made their comments. Yes, Jesus is ruling all things, but he isn't fully, as we can see it, ruling all things right now. That happens on the last day when Satan and his evil legions are cast into the lake of fire. Until then, Jesus rules all things for the sake of his church, but he's not putting all things into submission under himself. yet. That's the distinction that is a very great difference. But what happens? Her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Think of the different times, going back to the he might devour him. Yeah, Herod tried to do it. How about when Jesus first started his ministry and they got ticked at him and walked him out to the brow of the hill and were going to throw him off? How about the different times that they picked up stones and were going to kill him and he disappeared and just walked out from among them and they didn't see him and he was gone? How about Satan trying one-on-one with Jesus in the temptation in the wilderness, trying to do him in spiritually? He couldn't physically do Jesus in. He could do that through his minions, but his minions never managed to pull it off. They were bad shots. They never got him, and they weren't ever going to get him. Those were the attempts to devour. But in spite of all that, he completed his ministry, and the child was caught up to God and to his throne. Such a quick, succinct description of the ministry of Jesus, because that's not what the text is about. The text is about Satan's operation and what he's trying to do. And it's going to continue as we go into chapter 13, and he calls forth the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. Verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. The woman fled into the wilderness. Why that imagery? When you encounter imagery here in Revelation, in the New Testament period, but especially in Revelation, we want to go and see where is there an example of this. What image, what concept, what thoughts is this wording trying to bring forth? Because it could just say, and God made it so that Satan couldn't destroy the church. And we're going to talk about that more later on, after we get down, Satan being thrown down to the earth and getting into the details of that. But what imagery is called to mind? Then the woman fled into the wilderness. Who went into the wilderness? The nation of Israel, the newborn child of God. And here the church is like the newborn child of God, right? The newborn child of God that he birthed out of the Exodus, out of Egypt, where he cared for them for those 40 years in the wilderness, providing for them. And think of the imagery of us in the church in the wilderness. We're in the wilderness. We're in the wilderness, and we're only able to survive because of the grace and the mercy, the abundant blessings God showers upon us. Manna from heaven, his word, right? The water of life, baptism, all these different images that are called forth in our minds by this phrase, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God. God was going to take care of her. God was going to provide. He does that through his word. He does that through his sacraments, the means of grace, Holy Communion, baptism, those things through which he builds and strengthens, creates faith. That is how he takes care of us. He takes care of the church. That's big picture church. That's big picture church. We'll get down into smaller picture church, the children of the woman, later on. But how long does this go on? With the children of Israel in the wilderness, it was 40 years. Here, it's 1,260 days. We've come across that number before. 1,260 days is the same as 3.5 years. It's the same as time times and half a time. It's the same as 42 months. And these are all the different references up here scrolling underneath me in Revelation where these numbers are used, okay? And I think there are actually even more. This isn't an exhaustive list. But the idea of time times and half a time comes from Daniel. And bottom line, it's all half of 7, half of the covenant, half of that number that describes God's interaction, beneficial interaction with mankind. 3.5 is half of that. Even I can do that math. It's half of that. It's imperfect. It's imperfect is the idea. It's associated with the fraud, with the dragon who speaks like a lamb, but looks like or looks like a lamb but speaks like a dragon. Those imposter ideas. Okay, that's the concept that's being set forth. As a period of time, the way it's used in the New Testament, and I'll use this verse right here to make it very clear. How long is the woman that is the church, that's us, in the wilderness? How long? Well, from the time that Jesus ascended into heaven until he comes back. Would we call that the age of the church? Yeah, we'd call that the age of the church. When that's spoken of positively from the idea of Christ reigning and ruling in his church, it's talked about as the 1,000 years. Banish all the millennialistic thoughts of a millennial age of Christ ruling here on this earth, like in a real kingdom in a place like, well, Jerusalem, not taught in the scriptures. The 1,000 years talks about the same period of time, but from the positive side of the coin. Lord blessing, taking care of. And this is in the domain and dominion of darkness in this sinful world. So it's talked about as 3.5 years, in this case, 1,260 days, that the woman is taken care of. The church is provided for. And yeah, guess what? Sometimes when you're in the wilderness, things can get tough. You can go through some pretty Spartan times, right? Harsh conditions. We endure that in the church, but still God provides for us. He takes care of us. Okay. So that's the picture. We kind of take a pause in the way the text goes with Satan being thrown down to earth, and then what he does once he's thrown down to earth. Some exceedingly fascinating stuff that is coming up with this. Just the whole concept of Satan being thrown down to earth. Some really interesting stuff about why he's thrown out of heaven, which leads to the question of what in the world is he doing there now? Or what at this time, what was he doing there? How did he get to be there? All those answers, all those questions rather, we'll have answers for in the next video. So make sure and come back for more. Do appreciate you being here today. Appreciate you watching this video. I pray that it's a blessing to you. I really appreciate when you share the comments, the thoughts, just a little bit of feedback. Love to know that it's having effect. Love to see the messages coming from around the world. Do go check out our website, decodingthedeception.com. We've got links to all our Bible teachings out there. I looked, I think on BitChute, it says I got 623 videos up there, and probably 590 of them are Bible teaching videos. You can go out and check those out. That's the easiest way to get to the specific links for the different books of the Bible. And I know a lot of you do that. You go and you find where I taught about Exodus and you just follow it all the way through. It's a great way to study the Word, and the website is a great portal to get to those things. So like, share, all those good things, put it out on your social media feed. We appreciate you being here. This is Matthias 76. God bless and have a great day.